In case you've not been off social media, haven't been reading newspapers, or haven't been living under a rock for the last month or so, you would be aware that Sri Lanka is undergoing a massive economic crisis. Every day, there are scenes like these where we see wide scale protests where people are on the streets protesting the government and the president to resign. The bankrupt Sri Lankan government has asked its citizens who are staying abroad to send cash home. To arrest some sort of these protests, social media platforms have been blocked in Sri Lanka. They are also going to default on the 51 billion external debt this year. Around 5 lakh people have fallen into poverty over just the last month or so. There is no fuel, no medicine, critical surgeries are being delayed, and the doctors are saying that this crisis will kill more people than COVID. At this stage, this is much more than an economic crisis. This has turned into a humanitarian crisis. So let's try and analyze how did they get here? The reasons for this crisis can be broadly categorized into four broad terms: policy, politics, fate, and of course, China. Starting with policy, there have been fundamental problems with Sri Lanka over the years. Their imports are greater than their exports. Their spending is greater than their earning. It simply spends more than it earns as a country. There is a trade deficit. There is also a budget deficit. The double debt is a recipe for disaster. Sri Lanka's response to this has been weird. Instead of trying to narrow the trade deficit, they've been trying to expand their debt, which has resulted in their debt to GDP ratio at 111%. How has this happened? They've borrowed heavily from their neighboring countries, from agencies, and now their debt, or the amount that they owe, is greater than what they produce in totality. This problem was first flagged off by the Asian Development Bank back in 2019, that the country's national expenditure exceeds its national income and that its production of tradable goods and services is inadequate. Another interesting thing that was happening in 2019 was the presidential elections. And this man, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, was campaigning for elections. One of his key promises was heavy tax reduction. One question that nobody asked was, if they were going to reduce taxes, how was the country going to make money? The voters never asked this question, and Mr. Rajapaksa did not care to explain. In 2019, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was elected as the president with a 52% vote share. Now we come to the second part, the politics part. After Mr. Rajapaksa was elected as president, he made two crucial blunders. One, he started with a series of tax cuts, as promised in his manifesto, which alarmed a lot of rating agencies who realized that the country will soon run out of money. So, naturally, this downgraded Sri Lanka to near default levels. How did this impact? The investors fled the country, and it became near impossible for Sri Lanka to access the international markets. The second blunder was that he banned the import of chemical fertilizers across Sri Lanka. He said that it was for better health, but in reality, it was to save US dollars because they were obviously facing a foreign currency crunch. This practically killed their farm output. White rice is the staple good of Sri Lanka, and its production fell by 50%. Shortly, Sri Lanka was forced to import rice, and this had never ever happened. Shortly after, Sri Lanka also banned the import of luxury goods. This was a clear warning to the Lankan citizens that they were walking into a storm. Now, moving on to the next reasons, we can club China and fate together here for the sake of understanding. Lanka avoided forming closer ties with India because they wanted proximity with China. We all know the story of their ports being owned by China, etc. They took tons of bilateral debt and chose to expand their military. Lanka bet on the Chinese help to drive their economy, which to an extent they did. They did put in some amount of money in the Lankan economy, but they also exported a virus. Now, Sri Lanka, as you might know, depends a lot on its tourism. 13% of its GDP comes from its tourism. Due to accumulation of the Easter egg bombings that you might remember and the virus, the tourism tanked. The tourist arrivals into the country, as you can see, dropped from 2.3 million in 2018 to just 0.17 million in 2020. Naturally, the revenue from tourism fell from $7.5 billion dollars in 2019 to just $2.8 billion dollars in 2021. So, 2021 revenue from tax has fallen. Agricultural production, which contributes to approximately 8% of the GDP, has fallen. Tourism has fallen. And foreign agencies are obviously not lending them money because of their poor rating. Lanka was out of money. So, what do they do now? They turn to their neighbors for help. Bangladesh, of all people, helped them out with a $200 million loan. Even India helped them with $500 million loan to pay for oil. But they couldn't manage these finances. Mr. Rajapaksa had one more gamble to play. In March 2022, he devalued the Sri Lankan currency. The idea basically was to qualify for a loan from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. But this has in turn resulted in a massive reduction in the Sri Lankan people's purchase power. Right now, 1 USD is 326 Lankan rupees. Inflation is up 30%, which means the price of food, the price of basic amenities has increased by 30%. Just as an example, the first thing that you think of Sri Lanka is a coconut, and a coconut which used to cost around 50 Lankan rupees now costs around 91 Lankan rupees. And it is not limited to a coconut. The prices of all your basic amenities like chicken, rice, and lentils have grown disproportionately, anywhere from 50% to almost 120%. Imagine being in their shoes when your basic food starts to cost almost double. So there is soaring inflation, a huge pile of debt, tanking currency, and bleeding foreign reserves. Everything that could go wrong with a country's economy has gone wrong with Sri Lanka's economy. Just humor me. How much money do you think Sri Lanka has right now? It's $1.94 billion, which is slightly more than the net worth of a certain Kylie Jenner. Let that sink in. They have around $8.6 billion debt due this year, and they've already said that they will be defaulting on it. As of now, they need around 20 billion US dollars just to restart their economy, just to import food, fuel, and basic amenities. Where will this money come from? Sadly, no one has a clue. So that's what's up with the Sri Lankan economy. If you didn't know, now you know. Uh, if you're still here, drop a subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video in your circles as well. And until next time, keep taking it slow.